Wealthy man pretends to be helpless but finds love. Where he leased, the mansion's lights glittered like stirred at night, but behind the glass walls, one man sat trapped in silence. To the world, Richard Hale was untouchable, wealthy, powerful, admired. Yet tonight he was about to risk it all, weaving a lie so dangerous it could either reveal love or destroy it forever. Richard Hale had everything most people dreamed of. At just 36, he owned companies across the city, drove the finest cars, and lived in a mansion that seemed carved out of marble dreams. But wealth had a way of building walls. Behind the sleek suits and practiced smiles, Richard often felt an emptiness he couldn't explain. He had been dating Vanessa, a woman who turned heads the moment she entered a room. With her diamond bracelets and polished charm, she fit neatly into his world. Everyone told Richard he was lucky that she was perfect for him, and yet, late at night when the house echoed with silence, he wondered if she loved him or simply the life his fortune gave her. The thought gnawed at him. He wanted to know the truth, to feel certain for once that someone could care for Richard Hale, the man, not Richard Hale, the millionaire. And so he hatched a plan, cruel perhaps, but necessary. He would pretend he'd been in an accident. He would trade power for helplessness, strength for weakness, and watch closely. Would Vanessa stand beside him? Or would she walk away? One crisp autumn morning, Richard staged the story. He told Vanessa he'd been in a serious car accident. His legs, he claimed, would no longer carry him. Doctors said the damage was irreversible. For the first time in his adult life, he wheeled himself into his mansion not as a man of command, but as someone vulnerable. At first, Vanessa's response was all sympathy. Her arms wrapped around him as tears glistened in her eyes. She whispered promises. "I'll never leave you. You're still my everything." For a brief moment, Richard felt hope. Perhaps he'd misjudged her. Perhaps love could survive even this. But days have a way of stripping away rehearsed kindness. The first cracks came quietly. She posted sorrowful photos on social media, garnering pity from followers. She posed beside him, painting herself as a loyal partner to a broken man. Yet when the cameras were off, her tone sharpened. "Richard, can't you just try harder?" "It's exhausting," she sighed one evening, tossing her phone aside. In those words, Richard heard it. The first hint of irritation, the first fracture in her mask. His stomach tightened. The test had only begun, and already the truth was seeping through. In the shadows of the grand house moved another figure, Elena Rivera, a maid who had joined the household only a few months earlier. She was quiet, diligent, her crisp uniform pressed each morning with care. Most people overlooked her. But Richard began to notice. It was Elena who placed the glass of water gently in his hands when Vanessa rolled her eyes. It was Elena who steadied his wheelchair on the garden path, her hands firm yet respectful. She never looked at him with pity, nor did she gaze at him with awe for his wealth. She simply treated him as a person. One afternoon, when Richard struggled to open a book with trembling hands, Elena stepped forward silently, placed a small cloth bookmark between the pages, and smiled softly. She said nothing, but the gesture lingered. Richard began to watch her in return. He noticed the way she hummed faintly while polishing the silver, the way she lingered by the roses in the garden as if flowers whispered secrets to her. For years, his mansion had felt like a museum, cold, curated, but in Elena's presence, small things stirred. Warmth, humanity, a reminder of something real, something money could never buy. Vanessa loved parties, and even Richard's supposed injury could not stop her from hosting them. That Saturday night, the mansion filled with glittering guests, laughter echoing against marble walls. Richard sat in his wheelchair near the terrace, dressed sharply but silent, watching as the crowd orbited around Vanessa. She thrived in the spotlight, telling exaggerated tales of his bravery, laughing just a little too loudly when people offered sympathy. Richard forced a smile, though his chest burned with humiliation. He felt less like a man and more like a prop in her theater of vanity. But Elena was there, standing quietly behind his chair, steady as an anchor. When Vanessa laughed too sharply at a guest's cruel joke, Richard's hands tightened on the armrest. Elena's grip on the chair grew firmer, grounding him. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was a shield. As the night stretched on, the laughter around him felt like poison. And yet, every time Richard dared glance back, he saw Elena's calm face. Her presence was like a lantern in a storm, a reminder that not everyone needed an audience to prove loyalty. That night, the contrast became clear. One woman performed love, while another lived it quietly. The days that followed made the truth impossible to ignore. Vanessa grew restless. She claimed work events and meetings with friends, leaving Richard alone for hours. When she did return, her patience wore thinner. She sighed at his slowness, rolled her eyes at his needs, and spoke more about the burden than the man. One evening, as Richard struggled to transfer from his wheelchair to the couch, Vanessa groaned. "This is ridiculous. I didn't sign up to be your nurse." The words sliced through him, cruel and unfiltered. But it wasn't just her. It was the silence afterward, the way she tapped her phone screen without a second glance at him. Later, when she left the room, Elena entered quietly. She helped adjust his blanket, smoothed it with care, and asked softly, "Do you need anything else, sir?" Richard shook his head, his throat tight. But when she turned to leave, he whispered, "Thank you." For the first time in weeks, the word felt real. It was then Richard realized this test was no longer about Vanessa. It was about himself, about what he truly valued and what kind of love he had been chasing all along. Elena often pushed his chair through the sprawling gardens where roses and lilies grew in perfect rows. At first, Richard saw it as a routine stroll, but slowly, those walks became more than that. One late afternoon, the sun painted the sky in shades of fire. Richard asked her almost shyly, "Do you like it here?" Elena paused, her hand resting lightly on the handle of his chair. "The garden?" "No," Richard said, his voice low. "This life." She thought for a long moment before answering. "It's not mine to like or dislike. But flowers don't care who owns them. They bloom for anyone willing to notice." Her words struck him. They weren't polished or rehearsed, but they carried truth. For years, Richard had measured life by ownership, by control. But Elena reminded him of something simpler, of beauty that asked nothing in return. As the wind rustled through the roses, Richard realized he was beginning to feel again. Not the hollow pride of parties, not the shallow flattery of society, but something gentle, unspoken, something that scared him as much as it healed him. Love, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it. Vanessa's cruelty finally reached its peak one stormy evening. Rain lashed against the windows as she sat sipping wine, scrolling her phone. Richard asked softly if she could help him reach a book from the shelf. Without looking up, she snapped, "Get Elena to do it. That's what she's here for." Richard froze. In her words, there was no tenderness left, no pretense of love, only disdain. That night, Vanessa hosted another dinner. Surrounded by her friends, she laughed loudly, mocking Richard's slowness, calling him a shadow of himself. The room erupted in uneasy chuckles. Richard's face burned with shame, his heart tightening like a fist. Behind him, Elena stood still, her hand steady on the wheelchair. She did not laugh. She did not flinch. She simply remained, a quiet presence against the cruelty of the crowd. When the laughter rang too sharp, Elena leaned just slightly forward, her voice low enough only for Richard to hear. "You're not less. Don't let them decide who you are." The words shattered something inside him. For the first time, he saw clearly. The woman who claimed to love him was the one who broke him. The woman who owed him nothing was the one who held him together. That night, long after the guests had left and the house had fallen silent, Richard sat alone in his room. The wheelchair sat in the corner, the brace at his side. His reflection stared back at him from the mirror, strong, unbroken but deeply wounded. He removed the brace, stood slowly, and walked across the room. The truth pressed heavy on his chest. He could no longer carry this lie. The next morning, when Vanessa returned in her usual flurry of perfume and designer heels, Richard waited in the living room. She barely glanced at him before announcing plans with friends. "Vanessa," he said, his voice steady. She turned. And then, before her stunned eyes, Richard rose from the chair. Her jaw dropped. What is this?" "I wanted to know if you loved me," he said simply. "Not the money, not the parties, just me." Her face twisted with fury, humiliation flooding her features. "You're insane. Do you know what people will think?" She grabbed her bag, muttered curses, and stormed out without looking back. The test was over. And so was their love, if it had ever been love at all. Richard expected anger from Elena when she learned the truth. Betrayal, even. But when he told her, her reaction stunned him. She gasped softly, her hands clutching her apron. For a long moment, she just stared. Then her eyes softened. "I knew," she whispered. Richard blinked. "You knew!" She nodded. "I noticed the strength in your steps when you thought no one was looking. I noticed the way your arms held more than you let on. I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place. But I didn't care about the lie." His voice cracked. "Then what did you care about?" Her gaze was steady, gentle. "The loneliness in your eyes. The man behind the walls. That's what I saw." Tears stung Richard's eyes. For years he had feared being unseen, unloved for who he truly was. Yet here was someone who had seen him all along. Not the millionaire. Not the performance. Just the man. For the first time he felt a strange, terrifying hope. That maybe love could be this simple. The mansion changed after that day. The parties ceased. The shallow laughter vanished. Instead, the halls echoed with softer sounds, birds in the gardens, the hum of Elena's song as she worked, the clink of teacups shared in quiet companionship. Richard no longer sought validation from society. Instead, he found himself listening, really listening to Elena. She told him stories of her childhood, of nights when her family had little, of dreams she never thought she'd voice aloud. He didn't interrupt. He didn't fix. He simply cared. In return, Richard shared parts of himself he had long hidden, his fear of being used, his exhaustion from pretending strength. Elena never judged. She simply nodded, sometimes smiling, sometimes silent, but always present. Their bond didn't grow in grand declarations. It grew in the way she brewed his morning coffee exactly as he liked. In the way he carried heavy trays for her, though he never had to. In the evenings, they walked side by side through the roses at dusk. For once, Richard felt alive, not because of wealth, but because of connection. One afternoon, Richard received an unexpected call. Vanessa wanted to see him. Against his better judgment, he agreed. She arrived dressed as flawlessly as ever, but her eyes carried something sharper, resentment. She wasted no time. "Do you know how foolish you made me look? People laugh behind my back now. All because of your little game." Richard listened quietly, his face calm. Once her anger would have shattered him. Now it only revealed the truth he had tried so hard to ignore. "I didn't play a game, Vanessa," he said softly. "I searched for love. But I realize now you never loved me. You loved what I could give you." She scoffed, her face twisting. "And you think that maid of yours does? She'll use you too. They always do." But before she could continue, Elena entered the room carrying tea. She set it down gently, her eyes meeting Richard's with calm certainty. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She simply stood, steady and quiet. In that moment, Richard realized something undeniable. Love didn't shout. It didn't demand. It simply stayed. Vanessa stormed out, her heels clattering like thunder, and Richard felt lighter than he had in years. Weeks later, Richard asked Elena to walk with him, not through the polished halls but beyond the gates. It was the first time he had stepped out into the city without the armor of wealth in years. They walked along ordinary streets, past small bakeries and children playing with chalk on the sidewalk. Richard felt strangely anonymous, and for once it comforted him. At a small cafe, they shared coffee from chipped mugs. Elena laughed as foam clung to her lip, and Richard found himself laughing too. Genuine, unrestrained. He realized he hadn't laughed like that in years. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Elena asked, her eyes warm. "Yes," Richard admitted. "It feels real." As they walked back, he noticed the way she greeted strangers with kindness, the way she looked at the world as though it was enough. For so long, Richard's world had been about more wealth, more power, more validation. But beside Elena, he realized what he truly needed was less noise, less performance, more truth. It was the beginning of a freedom he had never known. The bond between them deepened in ways words could barely capture. They planted flowers in the garden together, Richard kneeling in the soil without fear of dirtying his tailored suits. Elena teased him gently when he placed the roses too close, guiding his hands with her own. In the evenings, they cooked simple meals side by side. Elena taught him how to slice onions without tearing up, and he showed her how to bake bread his grandmother once taught him. There were no grand gestures, no champagne-fueled declarations, just small, ordinary acts of care, and yet they carried more weight than all the diamonds he had ever bought. One night, as they watched the stars from the terrace, Richard whispered, "I used to think love had to be big, loud, something everyone noticed." Elena turned her gaze toward him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Sometimes love is quiet. Sometimes it's just being seen." Her words sank deep, wrapping around his heart. For the first time he realized this was love. Not the performance, not the mask, but the quiet miracle of being known. Months later, Richard stood once again before the mirror in his room. But this time, the reflection staring back at him was no longer hollow. His eyes carried life, his shoulders carried ease, and his chest carried hope. Behind him, Elena appeared in the doorway, her presence soft but certain. He turned and she smiled, a smile that needed no diamonds, no spotlight, no audience. He walked toward her, every step steady. No masks, no lies, just a man who had been broken, now whole. They didn't need to speak. Their silence said enough. In that quiet, Richard understood something he wished he had known all along. Wealth might build walls, but love tears them down. And the truest kind of love is the one that asks for nothing, yet gives everything. The mansion no longer glittered with hollow lights. Instead, it glowed with warmth, meals shared, laughter echoing softly, footsteps carrying purpose. Richard and Elena lived not as master and maid, not as millionaire and servant, but as two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely place. Sometimes, in the garden, Richard would pause and watch Elena among the roses. She looked as if she belonged there, as if life itself had chosen to bloom through her. He would walk toward her, not as a man proving his worth, but as someone finally free of fear, and every time she looked up and smiled, he knew love hadn't abandoned him. It had simply been waiting, patient and quiet, for him to notice. Love had found him, not in the woman the world said he should have, but in the woman who saw him when no one else did, where he least expected it. He had found everything he had ever needed. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Whisperfeel. Every click helps us bring more stories of love, loyalty, and second chances into the world. Thank you for being part of this journey.